Okay, so picture this. It's 1992. U2's Joshua Tree Tour. You're in Columbia, South Carolina, thousands of fans. And among them, 23-year-old Dale Denwitty, recent college grad, full of life. But come morning, the music's over. And Dale, she's gone. Vanished.
A case that's haunted Columbia for, well, over 3 decades now. And that's what we're going to unpack today. We've got police reports, witness accounts, interviews with Dale's family, even some insights from the cold case detective who's been working this case and just refuses to let it go.
All right, so let's start with Dale's last known movements. We know she was last seen at a bar called Jungle Jim's. It's in the Five Points district. It was about 1:30 in the morning. Can you paint a picture of what Jungle Jim's was like back then?
So think lively, packed. Students, locals, music, conversations, just a typical place to be to unwind after a long day, or in Dale's case, to celebrate, after a concert experience. But here's the thing. Despite the crowds, nobody seems to remember seeing Dale actually leave.
It's like she just vanishes into thin air. Like a movie. But Dale's family, they're adamant that she didn't run away.
Yeah, no, they don't believe that at all. They describe her as very responsible, someone with a fear of being alone, actually. And she left all of her belongings at her apartment, which is that's a strong indicator that this wasn't planned.
So if she didn't run away, what happened? I mean, did something happen to her between the bar and her apartment? That's got to be, what, about a mile walk?
Yeah, about a mile. And the police, they searched the whole route meticulously. Nothing. No purse, no signs of struggle, no witnesses. And you got to remember, back then, 5 points, not like today, no security cameras. So it was a very different world in terms of how they could investigate.
Yeah, so it's like good old-fashioned detective work, Hit the pavement, knock on doors, hope somebody saw something. Any leads?
There were a few initial leads, but nothing panned out. And this is where the case takes a pretty dark turn. A name emerges. Ronaldo Javier Rivera.
Oh, wait. Rivera? Was it?
Yes. A convicted serial killer operating in the Carolinas, late 90s. And here's the chilling part. He was a student at the University of South Carolina when Dale disappeared. So very familiar with 5 Points, the nightlife, the student crowds, all of it.
I see where you're going with this. Are you suggesting that Dale could have been one of his victims?
It's a theory that investigators looked at, for sure. But they were never able to connect him directly to Dale's case. No physical evidence, no DNA, no confession. But it's a shadow that hangs over this whole thing.
Definitely adds another layer of, fear and uncertainty to this whole thing. So we've got a young woman gone from a busy area, no explanation, and then this possibility of a serial killer being involved.
Yeah.
What were some of the biggest challenges that the investigators faced back then?
Well, aside from the lack of security footage, 5 Points in the 90s, it was a mix, right? Locals, out-of-towners, especially with that U2 concert drawing people from everywhere. So trying to track movements and potential witnesses, it was incredibly difficult.
Almost like trying to find a needle in a haystack. I think about another case in 5 Points years later, the Samantha Josephson case.
Yeah.
And technology played a huge role in solving that one.
Yeah, exactly. Samantha disappeared in 2019, just a few blocks from where Dale was last seen. And all that security footage from businesses, ride-sharing apps, it was key. They tracked her movements, identified the abductor.
It really makes you think about how much has changed, with surveillance and technology. It's a double-edged sword. But in cases like this, it could be the difference between solving it and it going cold.
Right. But even without that technology, investigators, they focused on something else in Dale's case, her personality.
Okay, so trying to understand, if her character traits might offer any clues, what kind of person was Dale?
Petite. Everyone says that. But strong-willed. Not one to back down from a confrontation. Detective Rhee, he's been on this case for years. He thinks this makes it less likely that she was taken by someone she knew.
Why is that?
Well, his theory is if Dale knew her attacker, she might have gone with them, without a struggle. But knowing her personality, she would have fought back, especially if it was a stranger.
That makes sense. So then the focus shifts to a random encounter, maybe someone she bumped into at the bar or on the walk home. But wouldn't someone have seen something?
You'd think so. Crowded place like 5 Points. But early morning hours, the crowd's thinned out, people's attention, maybe elsewhere.
It's just baffling she vanishes. Years of investigation and still no answers. So what are some of the, the big unanswered questions that still remain?
That's what we'll get into next. The ongoing efforts to find Dale, the challenges, the complexities that make this case so mysterious, and the impact it's all had on her family and the community.
So we were talking about Dale's personality and how, that might play a role in what happened to her. It's interesting how investigators use those things, those details, to try and piece together a story. But without any physical evidence, that must have been a big problem, right?
Absolutely, especially back then. 1992, forensic technology, not what it is today, DNA analysis, barely getting started. And techniques like touch DNA or familial DNA searching, forget about it. Those weren't even, I don't know, an option back then.
So are you saying there could be evidence maybe collected at the time that if they looked at it now with today's technology could give them new clues?
It's definitely possible. I mean, imagine, let's say Dale struggled with her attacker,
Yeah.
right? Even a tiny trace, skin cells, saliva, something they might have missed back then. Now, it could be huge. With today's DNA tech.
Like those true crime shows, where they crack a cold case because there's a DNA match years later. It's kind of gives you chills thinking about it.
Yeah.
But let's go back to 5 points for a second. You mentioned the Samantha Josephson case and how the surveillance footage was so important in solving that. Can you kind of walk us through the similarities and differences between those two cases?
Yeah, both cases. Undeniably tragic. And the 5 points connection definitely adds this eerie element. But the investigations, worlds apart. Samantha's case, they had a ton of footage, businesses, traffic cameras, even those ride-sharing apps. They pieced together a timeline, found the killer.
It's heartbreaking, to think that if they had those tools back in 92, maybe Dale's case would be different.
It really shows you how much technology has changed investigations, but it also, I don't know, brings up questions, right? Privacy, surveillance. Would we be willing to give up some privacy if it meant being safer?
That's, yeah, a conversation for another time. But back to Dale's case, were there any other, leads or theories that investigators looked at over the years? I mean, I know Colombia has had other missing person cases.
Sadly, yeah, Dell's case isn't the only one. Over the years, there have been a few sets of remains found in and around Colombia. Every time it's like this, I don't know, a flicker of hope. Could it be Dale? But so far, none have matched her DNA. It's tough. It reminds you of all the families out there who are still waiting, still searching.
It must be an incredibly difficult thing to hold on to hope, but also face the possibility of never knowing. It's a testament to the human spirit. And speaking of which, I want to talk about Dale's parents, Dan and Jean. I mean, they've been living with this for over 3 decades. How they've been able to cope.
It's been incredibly hard for them. Dead ends, false leads, not knowing. They've even shared that they eventually moved out of the home where they raised Dale. The empty bedroom, the memories, it was too much.
It's like this physical reminder,
Yeah.
a constant reminder of what's missing. But even with their grief, they've become, advocates.
Oh, absolutely. Tireless advocates for Dale, keeping her case in the public eye, working with missing persons organizations, supporting other families. Their dedication is really, really inspiring.
It's a testament to love, right?
Right.
And the belief that one day they'll get the answers they deserve. I mean, to face something like this with that kind of grace and determination.
Says a lot about them and their love for their daughter. They refuse to let her be forgotten.
We've been talking about Dale's parents and just their strength and how committed they are to finding out what happened. It's a good reminder that every missing person case, there's a family going through just unimaginable grief and uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
But even with that, there have been, I guess, moments of hope, right?
Mm.
You mentioned something that happened in 2020, something about a sexual assault case. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so this was big. It really brought Dale's case back into the spotlight. A minor who had been sexually assaulted, she said that her attacker had made this comment. He said that she reminded him of Dale Denwitty, and that, along with some other circumstantial evidence, it led investigators to look at this South Carolina attorney who used to hang out at jungle gyms back in '92.
So they're thinking maybe he's connected to Dale's disappearance. Did anything come of that? I mean, did they find anything concrete?
It seemed promising, I'll give you that, but it ended up being another dead end. The attorney, yeah, he was charged with some other stuff, but the police have said, publicly, that there's no evidence connecting him to Dale.
Another blow to the investigation. And for Dale's family, I mean, that's got to be tough. But it seems like every time things go quiet with this case, something happens to bring it back up again.
It's true. It's like Dale's case just refuses to be forgotten. And that's a good thing. Keeping her story out there, raising awareness. You just never know when that one piece of information, that one little thing might come up.
The power of, I don't know, collective memory.
Yeah.
And never giving up hope. But even with these glimmers of hope, we still don't know what happened. What happened to Dale Denwitty?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's what everyone wants to know. The investigators, her family, the community. 30 years and still no answer. Was it random? Was she targeted? Or was there something else going on that we haven't even thought of? The truth is out there, somewhere, just waiting to be found.
And that's why Detective Ree is still working this case. All these years later, he's dedicated. Countless hours, chasing leads, talking to witnesses again, looking at every single piece of evidence. Pretty inspiring.
It is. It gives you hope, not just for Dale's family, but for anyone who's had to deal with a missing loved one. It shows that there are people who won't let these cases be forgotten, people who believe that every victim deserves justice, no matter how much time has passed.
As we wrap this up, I'm struck by just how, I don't know, how complex this case is. No answers, so many questions, and how much all of that weighs on everyone involved. It reminds you that some mysteries, they just don't have easy solutions, and they leave behind a lot of heartache and what-ifs. But even without a clear answer, I think it's important to keep exploring these cases, to understand the challenges, and to remember the victims. Like Dale, a young woman whose life was cut way too short.
And it reminds us that we can all do something. Share Dale's story. Keep her memory alive. Encourage anyone who might know something, even the smallest detail, to come forward. That could be the thing that unlocks this whole thing and brings some peace to her family.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Dale Denwitty's case. If you have any information, please contact the Columbia Police Department or Crime Stoppers. No detail is too small. Every tip, it could be the one that brings us closer to the truth.